This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. All right. 7 o'clock. Call the March 7th DeSoto City Council to a meeting to order. We'll start with roll call, please.
Tripp,
Here.
Daniels,
Here.
Hanamichael.
Here.
McMarion,
Here.
Lane,
Here.
all are present.
All right, thank you. I would invite you all to please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our first item tonight is our consent agenda. Tonight on the consent agenda, we have approval of the minutes from our February 15th City Council meeting, approval of pay ordinance number 968, approval of bid from Spencer Concrete for aquatic center repairs, and approve resolution 2037 authorizing deferred compensation plan for the employees of the city of DeSoto. Is there any item anyone would wish to remove for further discussion? If not, I would look for a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion of the motion? Roll call, please.
Lane,
Yes.
McMarion,
Yes.
Tripp,
Yes.
Daniels,
Yes.
Hanamichael.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. Our next item is call to public. Members of the public are welcome to use this time to comment about any matter relating to city business that's not listed on tonight's agenda. The comments that are discussed under call to public may or may not be acted on by the council during this meeting. Does anyone wish to address the council under call to public? Yes, please come forward, state your name and address.
Good evening, sir. My name is Leroy Messenger. I'm an attorney, and I represent Greg Vandenberg and his wife Ann in regards to a issue of annexation of property to the city of DeSoto. My client initiated an action to be annexed their property along Kill Creek, or along 95th Street, on or about December 18th. We complied with all the city codes and filed the request, and everything looked good. As I said, we complied with all the requirements. They have a house out there already. It's about 38 acres of land. About half of it is in the floodplain, and if you don't realize what the floodplain out there looks like, if you drive by 95th and you see the power poles being put up, you'll notice down there where his property is, the concrete that the power company poured for the base of the tower is about 10 feet high in concrete, whereas most of it is only about 12 inches high on the rest of the lot. So they're expecting a floodplain in that area by the power company of up to 10 feet. So most of my client's property would be in the floodplain, and probably just without a massive amount of money would not be eligible for any kind of development. Now, they purchased the property long before anyone knew about Panasonic, and I'm glad you guys have got that project. They purchased it, they built a house out there and a little small gymnasium type situation. One of the reasons I want to move to DeSoto is she wants to have a home office. Okay, she specializes in wellness and counseling of people, and her impact on 95th Street and Road as far as traffic is concerned might be 1 vehicle a day, maybe on a busy season, 2 vehicles a day. So it's de minimis impact of traffic on the road. Okay, the result we got from the city, and we'll ask this, our purpose of tonight is to ask you to look into it and see what we need to do, was we got a response back that said we had to waive our rights to objecting to a benefit district to widen 95th Street, okay? And as I said, my client purchased the property with the current intent. They intended to, at some point in time, locate out there. My client has actually looked into getting a conservation easement along Kill Creek to preserve it because they wanted the peaceful nature of the property and the quiet, okay? And now all of a sudden we've got this requirement that we have to waive our right to object. And my clients don't object to a benefit district long term, but without knowing how the allocation of funds is going to be, whether it's going to be by the total land mass or if it's going to be along the strip along the road, it's questionable what they can do or can't do. And so they don't want to agree to anything that they wouldn't have any full knowledge of. And no resident of DeSoto would want to have to waive their rights without knowing all the facts and information. None of us here would waive our rights without knowing how the property or the city was going to do it. And if you look at the property, the main use of that road is going to be a parallel feeder into K10 down on Kill Creek, okay? Because if you look at the traffic flow at the intersection up there, that with everybody going off of Lexington onto K10 is going to have to cross traffic. You got traffic lights on both sides, so there's going to automatically be a bottleneck when you got 4,000 people working out there. So that's going to shunt a lot of people that are going back to the Kansas City metropolitan area down 95th Street where they can just turn right, get down to Kill Creek Road, and jump up on the interstate by just turning right. Okay, so my clients don't want to waive their rights, at least ensures that they'll have a say in what's going to happen and how that road is developed and how their property is going to be treated. So we would like the council to relook at that issue of if we complied with the code, and we were in the city and purchased the land before anybody knew about the Panasonic plant, that we ought to be allowed to just go ahead and annex based on following the code. And we would ask the council through the city government to look into it and see what we need to do in order to accomplish that goal. I know I'm supposed to be limited to 4 minutes, and I'm sure my 4 minutes is up. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for your comment.
Do you want to talk?
I'll circle up with Mike after the meeting when we'll get together and revisit. I don't know that we've ever not had this requirement on an annexation that, I mean, obviously we haven't done a lot of annexations, but I think we have had this stipulation in all the annexations I recall that we've done since I've been on the governing body. Appreciate your comments, and I will review it, and we may discuss it at a future meeting, but we'll get back to you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Anyone else under call to public? All right. Old business, we do not have any, so we will move on to item 4A, which is a discussion to a potential revision to the economic incentive policy.
Yes, Council. The last time we looked at our incentives policy was just not quite a year ago in May of 2023, mainly to address incentive levels for residential developments. And because of the pace and quickly changing nature of the economic landscape around DeSoto specifically, annexation requests such as the one we just heard about and other development interests, probably is a good idea to review this thing on an annual basis. just to make sure that it still aligns with, with our vision for growth and encouragement of that growth, as appropriate, given the circumstances. I know there's been discussions lately about particulars of incentive levels that are contained within the policy, that may need looked at. We also have the incentives map, that, of course, maps are changing quickly around DeSoto these days. It probably warrants a closer look as well. In addition to those things, we do have, recently we've initiated a practice to look into a potential developer's financial viability when we're considering incentive requests, just to make sure that there is some wherewithal and capability to do a project. If we do indeed grant one, that there is a project in mind with some funding in place that looks feasible, rather than having false starts, as we've had a few of those recently. So that's been a practice. It's not been codified into our policy, so that's one change that we would suggest, is adding just a paragraph there that I have in the staff report, that essentially after the formal application is submitted, but before it comes to the council for the initial discussion, that we have our financial advisor look into the viability of the project on a cursory level, just to make sure that there is some funding, some structure in place to implement the project. Beyond that, the item is listed, it's on the agenda here tonight as a discussion, general discussion item. I'd like to take any thoughts or suggestions council might have about possible changes, and then also, what are your thoughts on the process to change that? Do we want to just mark this up in draft form and bring it back to a later council meeting, or do we want to form some sort of a committee to work on it on an ad hoc basis to bring it back at a later time? So the floor is open for those discussions. Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you. Well, Danny, I know you had a few thoughts that you wanted to share about this. Would you like to start the discussion?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. There's a couple of things that the one is on the incentive policy down there at the very, I think it was 13.2 or something, on the dates and the amount of the incentives. I wanted to do away completely with that, those right there on the years and the maximum level of the incentives. And the only reason that I have a problem with this is looking at, we're tying hands of future council members when we do something like this, above the council members that may be here or may not be here in those dates, since it stretches out full far. I don't like to see us pass anything that puts restrictions on future council members and ties their hands. And so that was one thing I wanted to do with it. We know about the incentives. I think that this body can judge that from that, and we know what that looks like. We can keep that in mind as the years go by, but we don't need that there for that. I think that we can take care of that ourselves and do it on a case-by-case study. The other thing, the representative from the council to the financial board needs to be an independent body, not involved in any business that is with the economic incentive deal. So I think that the mayor's appointee would not want to have an appointee with a business that is there be independent, so that it wouldn't be any conflict of interest or anything on that at all. And that way we know that we got an independent person from this council that is on that group. And that's the only two things I really had, Mayor. So that's the only thing that, the rest of the stuff I agree with, and that's the only two things that I had that bothered me. And I'm willing to make changes or help in any way I can, but I just figured that's unfair for future council members, and I didn't want to put that burden on anybody in the future.
Okay, thank you. Victoria, any? Rob?
I was going to say, I'm fine with the way that it's currently listed. Addressing Danny's thing, and it's not so much that I agree or disagree with them on it. But it's more for Victoria and Courtney as far as background. The years and percentages that are up there, the intent of that at the time that the council passed that was the fact that we need housing now. And so it was to pretty much incentivize the first come, first serve. I'm not disagreeing with Danny that it could tie the hands of future council, so it may be better to be open. But it was kind of that, we need it now, so we're offering the 80% now, but by, the thought process was by 2026, 2027, we've got projects in the pipeline that are gonna be constructed, therefore, the need for the residential may not quite be as urgent, thus, the projects may end up paying for themselves, was at least the thought process behind that.
Yeah, I think it was to communicate our intent that incentives for residential projects, we see less of those happening in the future. So I mean, that was the idea.
Yeah,
It was just to communicate to those developers in the world that that it's things, we don't see conditions staying the same long-term.
The other point I would make on that is I don't think anybody has been impacted by that incentive right there, because nobody that has come to us in the last years has used the constitutional tax abatement. They've all used the IRB, which is a different incentive than this, so.
And I guess along those lines, 1-1307 basically allows the council, any future governing body, to waive any element of the policy that, as they see fit, at their discretion. So, I mean, I think we already have that ability to accept or not accept that. Should we choose to change that table at some point in the future, we would, no one, I don't think, based on what we have now, would be bound, strictly bound to that table. So,
If I could just ask, on that item C, I think the intent there, Mike, you can correct if I'm wrong, but that was intended to apply to all tax abatements, not, because as Rob points out, constitutional,
I think it was.
we've never, I mean, in the last 15 years, we've maybe done one.
Yeah,
so-
maybe there's a need to clear up this language. I think that
I
was the
think the
intent.
intent
Yeah.
was
It wasn't just for
abatements, but
constitutional. Yeah,
as it's written in here, it's constitutional,
and we
which.
don't do those. Yeah,
yeah, that was,
certainly
yeah.
should be cleared up if we're gonna leave
Okay.
it.
And then if we're clearing it up, then do we come back to Danny's point of just leaving it to where there's a maximum cap that the council can override, or do we leave it in there to try and at least give the intent of, we need the housing now, and in 2-3 years, the housing need may not be the same, and when we revisit it next year or the year after, we can then modify it as well.
Yeah. Not sure. Courtney, or were you done, Rob?
Yeah, I'm done.
Any thoughts or comments to share?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll say, I've never heard it voiced over, but reading through the incentives and the structure there, I kind of assumed that was the intent. We, have an extraordinary set of circumstances in our city right now. Therefore, we're trying to incentivize making sure we have the housing to support the growth. I do like that there is that kind of structure to incentivize that development now, and also demonstrate that we as a city may not be incentivizing to this level forever. We could look at how long that time horizon outlined in the document is, if we wanted to, do we want to go all the way to 2029 with outlining that? The other thing I wanted to mention, I know it came up last council meeting, was the table for the schools has changed and evolved a bit. So I feel like this would be a really good time to take a look at that and to make sure that we are still holding the schools harmless in any incentive packages that we're awarding.
So to clarify, like the cap of 80% may need to be 75%, and because of the school district pricing, or 80% may work. Is that where you're going with it?
Exactly, and just to take a look at that, because I know that table had evolved a bit. And I do know that, our schools are, an absolute treasure to this community, and that has been the intent of the council, to make sure that the schools are held harmless in that. You know, it might not be bad to take another look at the map, just because we've had a couple of discussions that have been very closely adjacent recently. And then as far as the, you know, initial topic at the top of the document in terms of the, you know, formalizing the kind of financial viability process of development, I think that's a good addition to be made. I think that's a responsible thing for us to be doing as a council, to ensure that if we are offering an incentive, that it is, you know, well-positioned to come to fruition.
Okay. Thank you. Kevin?
Yeah, I'm glad we looked at this periodically. I'll, go back to kind of how this came to be and started with the committee and really looked at how we want to use incentives. I think, one, it's important that we have an economic incentive plan that's understandable and that we follow the plan, because that's what's good for an applicant, is to know what are the rules. If I follow the rules, then we're gonna go along, and so to have a plan and follow a plan. And then to update it periodically. And yes, we've had a lot of change. I think a couple of things that we've talked about before, or at least I've mentioned before, where we talk about backing up from the little table of dates and you go back to limitations on where things will be applied. We talked about multifamily not located in incentive areas 1, 3, or 5. When we've had the ones in area 4. I think we need to list area 4 in that. So 1, 3, 4, and 5. There's a few places where that follows through, including 1303C, that paragraph you've been talking about. It references incentive areas 1, 3, and 5. You need to put 4 in there, and then when you get into the part where the table of dates applies, for multifamily residential projects not located in those 1, 3, 4, 5, that's when the little table of dates apply. So we need to put the 4 in there. On that one, my thought on the table of dates and percentages, I think we are pretty hot in terms of where we've issued incentives in residential, and that, as Rob said, was exactly the intent, was to throttle that.
Well, and the other intent Courtney brought up was the fact that just because we gave it now doesn't mean you get it in the future.
Yeah, right, and I don't think it really, this policy doesn't really tie any future council's hands, because just like we're talking about updating it and revising it right now, we can continue to do that. I would probably suggest that, are we scaling it back fast enough? I would have, if I were gonna throw my comment on here, I'd have probably taken 2029, maybe even 2028 off, and look at a 80, 50, 25 dial down, dial it back a little faster, because I think we're running really hot in terms of areas, how many areas we do have multifamily residential incentives not in areas 1, 3, 5, and potentially 4. So my suggestion would be to consider scaling that back. On going back to limitations on the prior page, where it does pick up those areas, the intent is multifamily residential projects not located in 1, 3, or 5, potentially 4, which do not provide quality affordable housing. So if there's not an affordability consideration, and do not accomplish infill and redevelopment opportunities, then they are limited from this. We've stumbled a little bit over the definition of what is infill, and frankly, we could say anything is infill. Anything that builds on a piece of vacant land is infill. We've stumbled on that. What is infill? So I think I don't have an answer for it sitting right here, but I think we ought to come to some mutual understanding on what we're talking about infill. And is that in, the original kind of Old Town area? Is it, what is it? Because we can, and I think we've approached using I know we've approached using infill as the reason why this doesn't apply. The next bullet, where the city has made recent capital investment infrastructure investments, will be considered an incentive itself and will be considered when evaluating the request. If we recall, the thinking there is that for areas like, say, where 91st Street was pushed through from Lexington to Sunflower, and the city made the investment to build that infrastructure, often it's the use of incentives. Incentives are used to fund infrastructure, and so if the city's already plowed the money into the infrastructure that enables or activates a piece of property, then it ought to be considered that the city has already made some of that investment, and therefore you would scale back the incentive that is offered, rather than plowing all the incentive back into the property. You scale back the amount of incentive that's allowed, because the offsite improvements aren't needed. I think where we are, since we have seen a tremendous amount of investment, even though it's been on behalf of Panasonic with 103rd, Lexington, sewers getting built, my thought would be, might we want to dial back some of those properties that front those areas where those capital improvements have already been made? So it might cause some revisions to the zones on the map. Since that infrastructure is in place and now those properties have been activated in terms of roads and sewer and water and other facilities that are there. So I might, if I were looking at it, I would kind of think about considering that that's been reallocated. Now, in contrast, 95th is going to be one of the next big areas that's going to need improvements, and so certainly those areas that are up there along the 95th Street corridors may be considered for a little bit more generous incentives. So that was kind of all I had on that. You know, I don't want to dig into the map and start going into details, but if we do want to consider the map of the table, if we do want to consider 4 in the list of those areas, then we need to look at the matrix, because it's, and consider making the, well, of course that's under the constitutional abatement, but it's the maximum percentage of incentive allowed, and reconciling 4 with 1, 3, and 5, and making those similar. When we did the map and the matrix, they were really intended that the map is used to drive what we're trying to accomplish in the future land use plan that's in the comprehensive plan. So in alignment with what we want to do, what we're trying to accomplish, what we're trying to incent, and the community we're trying to create, is create incentives that create those things that are on the future land use map. The table, because it has the category of the strategic initiative that's being accomplished, is saying, how are we driving our strategic plan relative to our incentive policy, or how are we using our incentive policy to accomplish our strategic plan? So I just, you know, I think that this one probably is good, although we do need to talk about what is our current strategic plan. But I think with the map, what we need to make sure we're doing is updating our future land use map, going through the comprehensive planning process and making sure our future land use map is consistent with where we've come and therefore where we intend to go. And so are we updating the zones on the map in consistency with our comprehensive plan update? Comp plan is supposed to be updated annually. I think we're kind of in a process for there. Mayor, I kind of sent an email about that, but I want to be sure that we are doing that statutory annual update to our comprehensive plan, and the future land use map is pivotal to that. So I think I'd like to see us go through the comp plan update process and then come back and revisit the map. And in that, we now have more extraterritorial planning jurisdiction to work off of, because we've got new areas that have been annexed. So like we added 18 across from K10 down there, but I think with the idea of extraterritorial planning, we really pick up all of the rest of that white space of what we formerly called the Southwest Growth Area. So Mike, kind of where you have your cursor there, is kind of left that out because it was, you know, rural residential, no plan, no thought. But what do we want to do with that? And what do we want to do with the north side of K10 at the Edgerton Road interchange? But I think that should flow right off of what we're seeing for an updated future land use map off of our extraterritorial planning process. So, yeah, and then, you know, as Courtney said, I think area 4, where we picked up Dave Anderson's project, the residential project, I think we need to update the map to be consistent with some of the actions that we've actually taken. So those are my thoughts.
All right, so, strategic plan is in the middle of update, right? So that's on a
We'll be
scheduled
seeing a
meeting.
draft at the next council meeting.
Whoops.
Yeah.
So that changes to that strategic plan then would have to be carried through the incentive matrix and the.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about comp plan?
It was the intent to look at the comp plan right after we did the strategic plan
Okay.
as a flow through.
Okay.
Yeah. So this could fit right in with all that.
Yeah. Well,
They were like-
definitely got to do a future land use map update.
Right, so it's almost like chronologically or workflow-wise, like, then this update actual needs to be visited then after we complete those two tests, right?
Or parallel.
Well, I mean, it can be
whenever,
parallel, but we can't finalize it until we
Yeah.
have,
yeah.
if we want a complete document, until we have a new strategic plan that would, so that we can align our incentives matrix to the new objectives in the strategic plan.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, is there enough between those that it would be better done in work session where we have more time to discuss? Or council meeting give us enough time?
Yeah, it seems like there is a lot. You know, there's the matrix, there's the map, there's policy, you know, there's, and I think over the course of the strategic plan update, we will be having a work session with that. I think we can talk about the structure of how we want to go about this. We don't have to decide tonight, but it does seem like it. We're not just going to draft up stuff and have
Right.
agenda item after agenda. That's not how this is going to get done, I don't believe.
It's not the most efficient way to
Yeah.
complete the task at hand, but, so not to kick the can too far down the road, but to, let's do it in conjunction with completion of the strategic plan and comprehensive.
Do we need to act on the suggested change to the financial review, though? The language that's drafted here for 1304D? Are you wanting to act on that particular paragraph?
I think there's leeway in the existing policy. It allows me to require additional study or investigations as appropriate. I think, you know, if we ever have an applicant that pushes back on that, maybe then we have to address it. I think we can get through the next several months with it as it is and still kind of implement that general policy that we do want to have that financial viability look before they come to us.
Okay? We good?
Yeah, good discussion. Thank you, Council.
All right. Item B, consider task order 2304 with PEC to develop plans and specifications for the 2024 overlay program. Joe, is that you?
Yeah, appreciate it. So on the agenda tonight is a task order for PEC to perform engineering services to help put together this year's mill and overlay program. On the list and within the write-up are the location of the 3 areas that we'll be looking at and bidding out. And so with everything going on, the thought was to have PEC kind of help us put it together and to be able to look at some of the bids that are coming in and help us decide kind of what's the best method to move forward with to be able to get a bid to do as many of the streets that are listed on this. So tonight asking for approval for PEC to help put together the contract documents and design plans so that we can put out the bid here probably late March, maybe the first part of April, the amount of $29,900.
Okay. Questions for city engineer? Got one on a related project, not this one, but since, I think it's PEC's as well. They also have the Waverly Water Tower, is that right?
Yep, that'll be on the next council agenda item.
Okay, that's all, good enough. I think we're ready for a motion then.
I'll make a motion to approve task order 23-04 in the amount of $29,900 and authorize the city administrator to execute.
Second?
All right, we have a motion, a second. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Carmichael.
Yes.
Daniels.
Yes.
Tripp.
Yes.
Lane.
Yes.
McMoran.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, item C, consider construction contract with Weideman Inc. to replace the sewer force main along 82nd Street.
Thank you, council. So we've had this item come up a couple times. A couple years ago, we went out to bid during COVID and received bids to actually replace the line. The bids came in about twice the engineer's estimate, so the project was kind of put on hold. Last year, we put together a set of plans and bid documents to line the pipe We thought that would be a more cost-effective method. We bid it out, I think, November of last year. We had one bid at $940,000. That, we figured that was not the way to go. So we kind of sat on our thumbs for a little bit, said, okay, well, what's next? Well, we talked with a couple contractors to see what the cost would be to go back in and replace the line like it needed to be. One of the contractors we talked to with Wiedemann and Corp. What was nice about that is that they recently went through a process through Johnson County for Johnson County wastewater for a terminal supply contract. So they went through a competitive bid process, setting their rates, their equipment, everything, all costs, bond costs and everything, and went through the county process. There were several contractors that submitted. The county narrowed it down to 2 or 3 contractors. Wiedemann was one of the ones that was approved by the county based on their costs. What they did is looked at their costs and gave them a theoretical project to see what that cost would be. And that was compared to all the other contractors that submitted. So they selected I think the 3 lowest contractors. And so we thought that instead of going out, redoing the plans and spending more money on the design side, the plans were good enough to be able to work with them to come up with a cost estimate to be able to, in this case, we will replace the line. The current line runs underneath, runs along the back of the curb at 82nd Street. We will be out in front of the curb on 82nd Street, but we will completely replace the line and add 2 air relief valves in it to mitigate the H2S that we get in the pipeline. We anticipate this work taking about 4 weeks, and we would start either middle of next week or the following week with the construction. So tonight we're asking for approval for the contract with Wiedemann in the amount of $410,225, and for the city administrator to execute that contract. And the contract has been reviewed by the city attorney, and it meets all of our standards.
Okay. Questions for Joe?
Just a comment, because this, does have some of the funding coming from the general fund contingencies, and kind of just raising a request for the future, knowing that we've tapped into those general fund contingencies a couple of times now with the contract with Shockey as well as here. So if tapping into that contract or into that fund again, I just want to get like an update, running update of where we are with the agenda items. But that's just a future request.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, no problem.
Anyone else?
I'll make a motion that we approve the construction contract with Wiedemann Inc. in the amount of $410,225 and authorize the city administrator to execute.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion of the motion? Roll call, please.
Daniels.
Yes.
Tripp.
Yes.
Monaco.
Yes.
McMorrin.
Yes.
Lane. Motion carries.
All right. Item D, consider ordinance number 2606 annexing 9675 Edgerton Road and 9735 Edgerton Road into the city.
All right, thank you, Mayor and Council. What you have before you is a annexation request from BD Properties. Currently, they are in unincorporated Johnson County. They're zoned RUR, and they intend to they actually have a rezoning proposal for multifamily for this area. The area is served by Edgerton Road, which is rebuilt. It's an improved road. There's also sewer access immediately available to these locations. It's an item that we have talked with the developer on a few items previously with our development meetings. We have seen some preliminary layouts, but there's no site plan submittal or anything like that before city staff to review before we bring to the planning commission. One thing that's interesting or different about this one than what Mr. Messenger was talking about is the services are ready and available at this location, and we're grappling with 95th Street on how to provide sewer to these areas and improve 95th Street. So with that, there's already a benefit district in place for Edgerton Road, so BD Properties would have to buy into that and also the sewer is available in this location as well. So we think it's consistent with comprehensive plan, the land use plan. We've also, to the south, we've annexed areas for Flint development for multifamily, and also on 103rd Street, there's some properties. There's a Flint development property near Clearview City, just to the west, that has also been annexed and rezoned to multifamily. So city staff's recommendation is to approve the annexation and allow the developer to proceed with the rezoning process, site plan development process, and ultimately conclude with the construction of some multifamily homes. So with that, I will stand for any questions you may have, Mayor.
Questions for staff?
Just would note, in the ordinance, we did reference that this comes within the benefit fee area, just to memorialize that once they connect Edgerton Road, they will have to buy into the benefit district.
Okay. If there are no questions, I'd be happy to
Make a motion to approve ordinance 2606, granting annexation for specific land of the city of DeSoto, Kansas.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion of the motion? Roll call, please.
Lane.
Yes.
McMoran.
Yes.
Hanamichael.
Yes.
Daniels.
Yes.
Tripp.
Yes.
Mayor Walker.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. Item E, consider determination of the excise tax rate for residences at Lexington Development.
Yes, council, did put together a memo and made it part of the packet. Also supplemented that information. Councilmember Tripp had some good questions about this. This pertains to a settlement agreement that the city entered into with Steve Brady back in 1999. So really, the issue that we're dealing with is the settlement agreement references submission of a site plan, a final site plan. And after digging into the city records, I'm fairly confident that that site plan was timely because the city council actually passed a resolution extending the date for submittal. So the applicant did make that deadline. The only remaining question is the quote-unquote development that's referenced in the provision of the settlement agreement. Can that be construed as applying to the current development that's on the, and its residents at Lexington, and Dustin Baker and Dawn Parr are here to, and I believe they'd like to address you about this, but there have been 2 other site plans submitted to the city for the multifamily part of the project, but it is true that the area we're talking about back when this site plan was submitted to the city, it remains that that same area is still slated for multifamily, and in fact, that is the project that Dustin Baker is pursuing is multifamily. So the question is, should the development that Dustin and Dawn are pursuing, should they get this excise tax rate of 9 cents per square foot, or should they have to pay the full freight rate of 19 cents?
Patrick, I probably should have declared my company is actually working for Dustin. I'm not, but my company's done the civil on the current project, so I should have declared a conflict. And
okay, no
turn
problem.
the meeting over to you, Rob.
So Brandon, if you can just note for the record that the mayor stepped away. So I know, as I indicated in the memo, Mike and I met with Dustin and Dawn and talked about this. At the staff level, we were not comfortable making this decision just because it I think it's proper for the governing body to make that decision, but Mike and I were comfortable believing that the 9 cents was appropriate, particularly given the off-site improvements that were done prior to the townhomes being put in, and those same improvements will be used for Dustin's project. So in essence, there was significant work done that will be beneficial to the current project. So with that, I'll stand for any questions and ask that Dawn or Dustin or both be allowed to address the council.
A couple quick questions. Were the improvements done by Brady or Parr?
I think both, but the reason I put in the memo, it was not clear to us exactly when that transition occurred between the two, but I think Dawn can better address that.
Come on out.
Yeah, good.
I'm Don Parr, and yeah, so I might do a little bit of history real quick to answer that. So Brady's the ones that own the property. I'm the ones that did all of the developing. And kind of a real quick history lesson on excise tax. My first subdivision here was in '92, and there was no excise tax. What we did, and then eventually, as we went along, you guys started doing a impact fee. And what we would do is we would go figure out the off-site improvements that were needed for your subdivision, literally get a bid on that, and then that is how much I would just pay directly as a developer. So there was no excise tax. So eventually we went to an excise tax. So there was nothing, you know, the original intent of the excise tax was to kind of help pay for these off-site improvements. And back when this was going on, there really wasn't a mechanism for that. So I don't remember, i.e. you wanted to be reimbursed for the off-site improvements that were built for that subdivision. But and you can correct me, but now there's an actual provision for that. So in other words, when we do these off-site improvements, the excise tax is reduced by that amount. Correct, Mike?
Can be.
Or can be if you,
Yeah.
if you get approval to
There
do
is a
that.
mechanism for
There is a mechanism for it. There wasn't one at that time. So that's why we wanted to get for the off-site improvements we did, that's where it kind of, one of the reasons, as I remember, that it ended up at that 9 cents is so that we would get credit for those off-site improvements, if that makes sense. So it wasn't really a reduction in excise tax. It was using the excise tax for off-site improvements, which is what it was originally for at that time. So that's part of how that came about. So it's not, the money was used, you know, there wasn't a reduction. It was actually used. It was just a credit back, if that makes sense. So, and as far as who did the improvements, Brady did all the site plan. He did all the engineering, and then I built all the roads. I did all the off-site improvements, you know, in conjunction with that.
Might be helpful, Dawn, if you can share with the council what those improvements were. I know we talked about it in our meeting, but not sure that the council is aware.
So remember, I started in '92, so a lot of subdivisions since then. I'll try to remember. No, basically, there was a lot of Lexington that was in disarray, and we had, like on all of the subdivisions I did prior to that as well. Once again, you would look at the existing roads and see if they needed fixed up, and then we'd go get bids on that. And that's literally how we figured out how much, you know, once again, it was called an impact fee before the excise tax. So we did considerable improvements, you know, along Lexington. I put in turn lanes. And then there was a lot of, it really wasn't Brady land, but going across the railroad tracks, that kind of thing. There was a lot of improvements to be made there. Had to put in railroad crossings. But the most expense was, of course, to Lexington and the turn lanes, because you know, there was nothing at the time.
Council comments? Do you have questions or comments?
Yeah, going back to my time on council or on planning commission in 2001 or so, you know, this is, I guess I would be asking for legal advice, which we're getting, that it could be appropriate to continue the settlement agreement, but I guess in my mind, this has always only had only one type of project ever intended for it, since I can recall in 2001, and that is multifamily residential. So I think it's in spirit with kind of the way it started and evolved and has continued. So it's not like ideas have changed and needs have changed and anything like that. It's just that this has been, I don't know, 25 years
Just kept
in the making.
stumbled many times. And we
So I
haven't
can
changed,
support it.
any of the boundaries either.
Right.
The original plot plan was for the threeplexes, and that's, to the inch where we put them, and this is to the inch of where the multifamily goes. None of
Yeah.
that's ever changed.
I can support it.
And that, I think, was part of Mike and I as well, that this land, we've had so many false starts and it's been vacant for all these years that, again, we thought that,
False starts on all the same intended use.
correct.
Yes, many.
Mike, are we still discounted on our excise tax for other developments, or are we back to 100%?
No, it's back in full.
Okay, but discounting of excise taxes and our incentive policy as far as up to council on that?
Well,
Yeah, it's
it
part-
is, sorry to interrupt, but you can make application through our economic incentives application, but this
This has
is
to do
not
with that
that. So
settlement.
I suppose if you,
So this is more honoring the settlement? and-
right, it's an interpretation
Yeah.
of the settlement agreement. And just as Councilmember Hanemichael mentioned, there is a gray area that I think you could go either way on it. So.
Yeah, I guess I struggled in the gray area a bit. It's been, looked at my packet, I'm like, does that really say 1999? And I do see where, the city has issued a 75% tax abatement for this development, so it is an incentivized development as it is. So extending a rate set 25 years ago when, cost of things and rates of things were so dramatically different than they are today, I just struggle with that leap.
Danny?
I feel strongly the same way. So it's in a gray area, but, I feel that we should go on with what the mayor and administrator come up with. I think that's still a fair adjustment.
Victoria?
It's just been sitting there. It's been meant to multifamily homes, so I don't really see much of an issue.
Thank you.
I was gonna say, I think my comments reside in a couple of areas. One, it's like Kevin, like Victoria, it's been sitting there, a lot of false starts. It's been the same usage over and over. The other thing, which is part where I asked the question of, okay, was it Brady that made the improvements or Don? Don, you're still involved in the project. You were the one that made the improvements, therefore, while it's gray, you are one of the ones that actually put the money in to do the improvements,
All the way.
which to me makes it less gray.
Yeah, okay.
If it was Brady that had made the improvements, paid for the roads, done all that, then you're one step removed. But being that you're the one that actually did the road improvements that are gonna continue to be used, you look at the map and it's, what's done there is money that you put in to get that project where it is, and that's still in play and in use, puts me less gray and more definitely on the favorable, saying, I agree with extending the settlement agreement to the current project and site plan, so.
So really what we'd be looking for is just a vote of the council to direct staff to apply the 9 cent rate as opposed to the current rate.
So, motion to honor the settlement rate of 9 cents on the excise. We ready for motion?
Yeah, I'll make that motion to honor the settlement agreement of July 13th, 1999, as it applies to the residences at Lexington project, and apply the excise tax rate of 9 cents.
I'll second.
Per square foot.
Per square foot. Yeah, good point. Not just 9 cents.
Darn
9
it.
cents per square foot.
So close.
Clarification.
So
You
close.
agree, Victoria?
I'll second.
Brandon, roll call?
Tripp,
Yes.
Daniels,
Yes.
Hatamaker.
Yeah.
McMoran,
Yes.
Lane.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
And Mike, you want to bring Mayor back? Meeting's yours again, Mayor.
We'll move on to item F. Discuss economic incentive application from Sunflower Redevelopment LLC for sewer benefit district in the area south of K10 and west of Lexington Avenue.
Yes, council, this is an initial discussion on another incentive request. This one's a little different because it involves a sewer benefit district area for a pretty sizable portion of land, most of which is on the Astria Enterprise Park, but there's also a good portion of the proposed benefit area that lies south and west of 95th and Lexington Avenue that would involve a number of owners other than the Sunflower Redevelopment District. Because we haven't done a benefit district in a while, I've asked Jeff White and Kevin Wimpy to come this evening to give you a Benefit Districts 101 background on mechanisms and just the procedures of how those come about. So Mayor, with your permission, I'd like to invite Kevin Wimpy to start that discussion, but as further background then, the application describes a project that's $12 to $15 million to construct 5 miles of sewer main throughout Astra and along the area that I've described. It came with a benefit map there, a colorized map. Everything you see in color here is part of the proposed benefit area. So it's hard to kind of get your bearings on here, but this line I'm drawing here is 103rd Street. Everything below this is on the Astra Enterprise Park, and then it turns into Lexington Avenue as it comes up and intersects with 95th Street here. So this area to the right there is also Astra Enterprise Park. The light green areas would be owners other than SRL, other than Sunflower Redevelopment. This 80-acre parcel here, that it's also the darker blue, is also owned by Sunflower Redevelopment. It was a part of the original Army ammunition facility. And then a separate owner here east of Lexington Avenue. You can't really see them on this map, but the sewer line essentially follows the drainage patterns throughout this area, starts on Astra Enterprise Park, follows an existing drainage creek that runs north and east through the area, crosses under 95th Street and Lexington Avenue, and then will connect to the regional pump station that's currently being installed as part of the Panasonic 5-mile sewer project there. So that's kind of the background.
So is the green in the benefit district or out of the benefit district?
It's in the proposed benefit district.
So the blue and the green are in the district?
Yeah, everything that's colorized here would be in the district.
And is the gray red on our map? Is that just the projector?
Oh, yeah, it must be just the projector.
Or TV? And is that part in the district or out?
Let me see what we're.
It's
It's in. Okay, so pretty much.
anything.
Yes, the gray is in, yeah.
So
correct.
anything with color.
Anything with color.
Anything with color is in the district. So the different colors don't mean anything as far as the district. It's anything in color.
Different ownership and
Okay.
kind of different land uses.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so I did list some of the policy considerations that the council might want to discuss and give feedback on. First of all, are we willing to form the special taxing district, even if some of these owners might not want to be involved, and actually might be in opposition to such a project? Are we willing to consider exemptions for those owners so that they don't have to pay the ongoing assessment up front unless the property develops? Are we willing to condemn easements across properties that might be needed to complete the project? And then there's some questions about project delivery. Sometimes the city takes ownership of the project. We hire the consultants, we hire the contractors, we implement the project, and implement it in that way. And sometimes the developer does all those things. They hire the engineers, consultants, contractors. We oversee the project and it's given to us at the end. So that's a project delivery discussion to have. And then also a pretty significant one here is the project financing terms. This is a pretty big benefit district in terms of dollar figure for a town of our size. And when you issue general obligation bonds for something like that, even though the city is not directly responsible for any of the payment, there is risk to that, that the bond community might take note of. So Jeff White will have some more information on that. So Mayor, with your permission, I'd like to invite Kevin Wimpy to talk about the statutory processes.
Certainly.
involved.
Right, yeah, thanks, Mike, and good evening, Mayor and Council. Kevin Wimpy with Gilmore and Bell, the city's bond counsel. It's been a few months, so nice to see many of you again and get a chance to speak with a couple of you for the first time. So my firm, Gilmore and Bell, is the city's bond counsel, like I said. By way of background, we're your legal representatives on bond transactions and economic development-related projects. As Mike mentioned, I'll go over the first few minutes here on legal procedure of benefit districts. And then Mr. Jeff White will handle the back end of the slides relating to financial considerations and so forth. So on the first slide, we talk about improvement districts, benefit districts, special assessment districts. There's a handful of names used throughout, but typically called benefit districts. And just think of this as a tool for financing public infrastructure. So these are limited to public projects. And the high-level concept is that the city issues bonds to finance the projects, and then there's special assessments levied over a defined geographic area, the benefit district, that will repay some or all of the debt service on those bonds via special assessments that show up on the tax bills every year. The sort of cookie cutter or general example is a new residential subdivision where you might have a residential developer owning acreage and wants to put in 100 rooftops and needs to extend sewer service, water service, or streets and so forth, and will petition the city to take on a benefit district project. On the last bullet point there about economic effect, or the major advantages to developers with benefit districts are that it provides what are referred to as off-balance sheet financing. So rather than the developer itself having to go borrow or come up with equity to pay the cost of these improvements, it instead enlists the city's help with the benefit district to agree to those imposition of assessments to repay the bonds. And then the city issues bonds, and again, that takes that financial burden off the developer to include that in the cost of their project. And then secondly, it allows access to the tax-exempt bond market via the city's issuance of bonds, which the developer itself wouldn't have access to, so lowers the overall interest cost to the developer. Okay, this slide violates every rule of PowerPoint presentations with the wording and coloration and so forth. But wanted to give you the healthy list of projects that are eligible under the Benefit District Act. But again, think public in nature, and generally the main ones we see over and over are streets, water, sewer. This is the really high-level slide, and each of these bullet points will go into a little bit of detail on the slides coming hereafter. But this is sort of the chronological list of steps to go from day one to actually issuing bonds and imposing those special assessments. First, of course, starting with district establishment, and then below that, temporary financing and construction of the improvements. And there's some optionality on those two bullet points, like Mike mentioned, where it can be either the developer or the city that does the temporary borrowing, and it can also be the developer or the city who constructs the projects and enters into the contract. Once construction's done, there's totaling up the final costs and preparing the assessment roll based on those final costs, so that actual spread of assessments, notification to property owners of levying of those assessments, and then an opportunity to prepay those assessments that we'll talk about later. And then ultimately, the city issuing bonds to permanently finance those costs. And really come in two flavors of bonds that Jeff will go into more detail about later, but general obligation, meaning the city's full faith and credit is pledged to repayment of those bonds, or special obligation, meaning that the bond owner or the bond purchaser takes on risk of special assessment payment because there is no city backing for special obligation bonds. Okay, on that first step of improvement district creation, there are two options here. One is that the city can actually initiate a benefit district on its own with certain notice and hearing to property owners that would be affected. That is the far more uncommon one for obvious reasons. The cities prefer the second option, which is that the property owners petition to create the benefit district and basically agree with the city for the imposition of those special assessments. And the threshold required on a petition is that the majority of the property owners liable for assessment sign the petition. Okay, this is just more recitation of the legal requirements here for that needs to be included in the petition. And as you'll see, it's all the general information you'd expect to see, which is what are we constructing, how much is it going to cost, where is the geographic boundaries of the benefit district, and so forth. The two items I'll stop on and go into a little bit more detail is method of assessment, and that means the method of spreading the cost to property owners. The statute provides a little bit of flexibility there, but more often than not, we see equally per square foot in the benefit district, meaning like per square foot of that you own within the benefit district, or equally per lot, straight across the board per lot, a lot of times used in residential development. And the other one, the proposed apportionment of cost. This is between the benefit district and the city. So the city does have the option to contribute a city at large portion to benefit districts in certain circumstances, but more often than not, we see 100% of the costs are borne by the benefit district. Okay, the resolution stage, this is the formal creation of the benefit district, and the contents of this resolution really mirror the petition and the types of information you'll see here. You saw on the previous slide. If the benefit district improvements are being constructed by the developer, at this stage, we typically see a development agreement entered into that would set forth all the milestones and terms of the developer's construction, bonding and insurance requirements, deadlines for completion, procedure and conditions to the developer's reimbursement for those costs and that type of thing. And then on the last bullet point, the resolution by law does have to be recorded in the real estate records, with the idea being that future owners who purchase property that's existing in the benefit district would have constructive notice on their title report when they purchase property within the benefit district. That resolution would show up on the title report. Okay, once construction's complete, we move on to actually levying the assessments, and this is where the city would total up all the costs and hold a public hearing notifying property owners, making certain publications, and then actually considering an ordinance levying those assessments. Once that ordinance is passed, there's the prepayment period I mentioned earlier. And this is the opportunity for property owners to, rather than pay over the term of years via special assessments, they can pay a lump sum, some or all of that cost up front, with the idea being they'd avoid the interest accrual on top of that principal amount. So a property owner may not want to just have assessments levied on their property, may not want to pay interest costs and just pay that amount up front without incurring interest. Any prepayments would reduce the size of the bonds. So if you think about it that way, once you total up the costs, you net out any of the prepayments that the city pockets at that point, and then that ultimate amount of borrowing is determined. And then once the assessments are levied, the county should be notified, and that way the county can include this in tax bills in the future years. Pre-construction assessments are an option under the statute where, rather than waiting till construction is complete and final costs are known, some of the procedure can be done upfront before construction occurs, where the city can levy maximum assessments. And then that, at the end of construction, once final costs are known, it becomes an administrative function to respread the assessments lower than that maximum amount. And the obvious advantage there is that you may have fewer individuals and property owners to notify before the property gets platted and broken up in the case of a residential subdivision. Therefore, it kind of eases the administrative burden on the city. I think my final two slides here are just highlighting one special option or rule under the benefit district statutes. And the overly simplistic lawyer map there shows a fact pattern where you have the existing sewer main on the left and two properties, and the property on the right is ready for development. And this benefit fee concept sort of accommodates varying speeds of development for properties that might be benefited by the improvements. And so the facts here that the farmer's property on the left doesn't have sewer, doesn't need sewer, isn't going to develop. But if they would later develop, they would obviously tap into that sewer line. And so there's got to be some equity between the developer's property and the farmer's about who paid for this, you know, and that the farmer can't, so to speak, take a free ride on the developer developing sooner and actually having to incur that cost. So on the next slide, describes the benefit fee process and how that might work. And in essence, the farmer's property, if it would develop during that assessment term, owe a lump sum payment that would be the hypothetical amount of assessments that would have been paid to date had it been in the benefit district from the starting date. And then thereafter, both those costs, both of the assessments on those two properties would be recalculated so that for the duration of the assessment term, it would be broken up from there. So the developer's property then presumably would have lowered assessments compared to prior years, and the farmer's property would obviously begin paying assessments. The key question on a benefit fee fact pattern is who carries the cost in the interim, whether that be the developer paying 100% of the assessments, or in certain cases, the city sometimes takes on that cost, and then later hopes that the farmer's property in this instance would develop and the city can ultimately get repaid for carrying that cost. So, I think that's the end of my content. I'm happy to field any questions or just cede the floor to Jeff and stick around.
Kevin, I just thought I'd add also the concept that if we had an improvement, so for example, the stoplight that we did years and years ago, you can have a city at large assessment that the improvement, if it's deemed to benefit the entire city, you can have an assessment that would be across all taxpayers in the city. But without that, which we're not anticipating that would happen here, you know, all the transaction costs, all the cost of construct, that all is assessed to they're part of the assessment. So essentially the city is not out of pocket any funds if all goes well. And I think Jeff will address some of that. But
Yeah, absolutely. So not just the construction costs, but administrative costs and cost of issuing, you know, temporary financing or the bonds, that all gets rolled into the assessment amount in addition to the construction costs. So you're right on the front end of that front end financing, the city's covered, assuming it's a 100% benefit district project. And I'll give way to Jeff to talk about, you know, financial risk from there on.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Jeff White with Columbia Capital Management. We serve as a fiduciary to the city, providing advice on municipal bond transactions. So again, before we dive into finance, think big picture for a second. You have a rural piece of property. You've got a developer that comes in. They want to put, as Kevin mentioned, 100 rooftops on there. Kevin talked about the fact that this mechanism is used to finance public improvements. So think about stuff under the ground and think about stuff that's flat, right? Water and sewer lines, sidewalks, streets, street lights, typically those kinds of things. If you think about the pace of construction, the underground stuff typically gets done first before the houses or apartments go vertical. And so at the beginning of these projects, you have a whole bunch of cost and vacant property to assess. And so Kevin mentioned there's a mechanism in state law where we build all of the public improvements. The property owners then get a chance to determine whether they want to prepay. If they don't prepay, then we spread those assessments over a period up to 20 substantially equal payments. So we've got to have cash available to pay contractors. They tend to like to get paid now rather than in 20 equal installments over 22 years. And to generate that cash, we use financings to do that. So typically using bonds to bridge that period of time. So again, big picture, if you want to go to the next slide. Mike's got it. Okay. So why would we do these things? I actually think that the Benefit District Act in Kansas is one of the most well hidden and least known incentives tools that we can use for development. It tends to be a little bit regional. And I think it tends to be a little bit regional because typically in areas that have fast growth, it's really more common to see developers just construct all the underground, the streets out in front, and just build that cost and the cost of a lot. Versus outstate areas, and even large areas like Topeka and Wichita, you see special assessments used more commonly. These areas tend not to grow as fast. So if you went to buy a vacant lot in Topeka, you might pay $20,000. If you buy a vacant lot in Johnson County, you might pay $100,000. And the difference between those would be a little bit of where you are, but a lot of it is the fact that Johnson County, you don't have assessments on those properties often. You're paying upfront for the full share of the infrastructure that went into developing that lot. In Topeka, you're likely going to see assessment payments on that lot over the next 10 or 15 or 20 years. So it's a great tool to allow areas to develop. Many states have similar mechanisms. In Missouri, it's called neighborhood improvement districts. In California, it's called community facilities districts. These types of mechanisms exist all over the country because of the power they permit to see areas be prepared for development. But if you think about it, again, we are constructing all of these improvements. We're borrowing against the assessments over time, and there's not a single stick of wood pointing to the sky yet. So there's really not a whole lot except vacant land to assess. And so there's a lot of risk during the construction and lease-up periods in these properties where the field of dreams conflict, right? If you build it, will they come? If they don't come, you end up with an area that has a whole bunch of infrastructure and not a whole lot of vertical development on it to cover those infrastructure costs. We tend to see that the most successful special assessment projects, not just here but anywhere, are ones with well-capitalized developers where there's some level of assured development, so commitments to build and those types of things in place. High property value to assessment ratios, so the higher the cost of the assessment is versus the value of the property, the higher the risk that the owner might just walk away from the assessments. So if you have a very, very valuable piece of property and very small assessments, the likelihood of the property owner walking away from that assessment payer is smaller. If that relationship changes, the risk is higher. And then also, the more diversification of property owners, the less risk there is to default. So if you have a 500-home subdivision with 500 individual owners, there's probably always going to be one or two or three of those folks that are either struggling to make payments, or maybe there's a divorce and a fight over who's paying for what, or whatever the case is. Over 500 homes, you probably don't notice all that much, that very small assessment payment not being made on time or not being paid for a couple of years. If you have a single property owner and they miss the payment, you are going to notice that fairly quickly. So two distinct periods of financial risk we have in these areas. The first is construction period risk. This is while the underground improvements are going on. Often, as Kevin mentioned, there's temporary financing to sort of, again, bridge to the point where the final assessments can be made, and then waiting for the vertical construction, the homes, the apartments, the commercial buildings to be developed. Again, as Kevin mentioned, cities have a choice whether or not to be involved in the risk on that construction period, risk and financing. Then once the improvements are made and the final, go ahead, Mike, final costs are assessed, we're into the assessment period. And here, the key risk is, again, that the project doesn't develop to its full extent or doesn't develop as quickly as we'd hoped or had been projected. And you end up in a situation where you've got a bunch of improved vacant lots with property owners who are under financial stress because they weren't expecting to be carrying those assessment payments for a long period of time. And again, I think anytime that you place additional long-term burdens on a piece of property, it's going to affect property values. All things being equal, if you're selling a piece of property that has assessments on it versus a piece of property that doesn't have assessments on it, the one that doesn't have assessments should be, all things equal, be selling for a higher value than the one that has an ongoing payment obligation to the new purchaser. So we've got two approaches that cities can take with respect to financing these special assessment projects. And they are distinctly different, two sides of one coin, maybe, if you want to think about it. So the first one is one where the city actually uses its balance sheet, its credit rating, to subsidize the project. So this is called full faith and credit, or general obligation, where the city is actually issuing bonds backed by the full faith and credit taxing power of the city to back the special assessment bonds. We sell the bonds to investors, and we say, hey, investors, we expect to make payments of principal and interest on these bonds from the proceeds of special assessments as they are collected by the county and paid to the city. But if those assessments are not made on time, or not made in full, or not made at all, the city will use any lawfully available source of revenue to make that principal and interest payment in full and on time, including raising property taxes as high as they have to go and for as long as necessary to make sure that the investors are made whole. When investors are purchasing these full faith and credit special assessment bonds, and when rating agencies look at it, they don't care about the assessments. They're buying your promise to levy taxes if you have to repay them in full. And as a result, those bonds bear the credit rating of the city and bear the borrowing cost of the city, which is quite favorable. The other approach is special obligation. Think of these as revenue bonds. So here, the city is selling bonds to investors, and it says, hey, investors, we are going to certify our assessment list to the county every year. The county is going to impose those assessments, collect those assessments, turn those revenues back over to us. We will pay you every dollar that we get in assessment revenue, but no more. And if that's not enough to make the principal and interest payment that's due this year, then you suffer the risk, bondholder, that you're not getting repaid in full. There is no transfer of the city's credit to those, and as a result, the interest rates are higher because the risk to the bondholders is higher, and they may not be marketable, particularly early in the life cycle of a project, until there is some substantial development at the project. So you might, over time, have heard the term dirt bonds. Every one of these projects starts with the capacity to be dirt bonds, right? We build streets and underground infrastructure, and until there's vertical construction on that, really what you're selling is dirt with infrastructure. Go on, next one. So a couple more quick notes on full faith and credit. As I mentioned, because these are general obligation bonds at the end of the day, they do count in some instances against the city's statutory borrowing capacity. Not the case for water and sewer, but it is the case for streets and those kinds of things. It does count against the city's sort of leverage characteristics when rating agencies look at how much debt the city has outstanding. And as a result, the city's capacity to finance other projects can be negatively impacted by having special assessment debt on its books, all things being equal. In contrast, then, next slide, Mike, on special obligation bonds, because these are not ongoing obligations to the city except to turn over revenues it gets from assessment payments from the county. They don't count against the city's borrowing limits, and again, in most cases, they don't count against the city's rating agency leverage calculations, and then therefore they don't impact the city's ability to borrow for its other traditional municipal projects. I would note that in many cases, the higher cost of borrowing and the lower amount of leverage that a developer can get using special assessment bonds may negatively impact the ability of the project to proceed, and it's certainly likely going to increase the cost to the eventual buyers of those properties who are making those assessment payments. All right, fire hose having been drunk. Questions on process, end result, risks, benefits, how we do all this. I will note that one risk Kevin didn't talk about, and that I see fairly commonly, is that in that process, we start with a petition. Everybody's happy, right? I don't have sewer today. I'm going to have sewer tomorrow. I sign this petition. This is going to be awesome. We get preliminary estimates of what those are going to cost. Then we go out, we bid the project. We might have to rebid the project. We've got startup, contractor gets on site eventually, they build a project, there's weather delays, whatever. We finish the project, we tally up all the final costs, and then we send a note back out to the property owners, and they don't remember. Like, what do you mean I signed this petition 3 years ago to burden myself with a $3,000 a year assessment for the next 20 years or whatever the case might be? Or the person that signed the petition is no longer in that property, those kinds of things. So there are some risks that aren't financial to a governing body that come up in these things from time to time as well. They can be sort of interesting as we go along, particularly if the construction project takes a long time.
You'd mentioned that water and sewer projects don't count against your borrowing capacity?
Statutory borrowing capacity. So the rating agencies don't really care what you're borrowing for. They're gonna sort of count it against your leverage totals. But under state law, there is a general limit on the city's ability to borrow on a general obligation basis. Water, sewer, and streets in front of schools don't count against that.
Can you maybe address, one of you, I don't think it applies here, but how a benefit district can be defeated by more than 50% of the property owners protesting the benefit district?
Right, yep. Thanks, Patrick. So I think in my presentation, I mentioned there are two ways to form a benefit district. One is city initiated, where you notify the public and hold public hearings and publish and then hold a public hearing before you consider a resolution establishing a benefit district. That can be defeated by a petition from the majority of the property owners within the proposed district submitting a petition. In the petition-led benefit districts, the petition threshold to be legally valid is that majority of owners. So it's kind of the converse of that situation where you have those property owners signing up on the front end for the benefits, for the benefit district. There is the opportunity when assessments are levied under the statute. There's a 30-day protest period where property owners can protest that the procedural elements and the validity of the assessments are not. They can protest those things during that 30-day period. But by having a petition, some of that is definitely mitigated rather than on the city-initiated benefit district is where I see that more often.
Those percentages are calculated based on acres owned, ownership areas, or parcels within the district? How is that?
Yeah, Mayor, most commonly we see per square foot assessments, and the statute says it's the majority of the property owners liable for assessment. And so it's whether it's who owns the majority of the square footage or liable for the majority of the assessments.
It's kind of noted in one of the questions posed to us here that there could be exemptions, especially, here it's noted, there's a question about agricultural residential exemptions. So, how do exemptions typically work, and is it often by property type, or how common or uncommon is that?
I don't have it in front of me, Councilmember. I think, is it a reference to agricultural deferral and
agricultural it's for, the question in the packet is, for unwilling participants, should we consider agriculture or residential exceptions to payment of the special assessment? In concept, these owners would not be required to pay unless their property was developed.
Understood, thank you. Under the Benefit District Act, there's a bunch of case law about anyone who's benefited should be in the benefit district. So there's some limitation on picking and choosing property owners if they were to, for instance, tap into a water line or sewer line that's constructed. For the most part, if you're deemed benefited, you should be in the benefit district and paying special assessments. During my presentation, I mentioned one special rule under the Benefit District Act referred to as benefit fees, where if you're not going to tap in immediately, there is a potential to defer special assessments for those property owners who aren't currently ready to develop and utilize or benefit from the improvements. And as I mentioned, at that time, the key question in those cases is who carries the cost in the interim if there is a property that doesn't immediately pay? Is it the rest of the benefit district? Does the city pitch in and take on that repayment risk? And then the last one that is similar to benefit fee is called agricultural deferral. And I'm not going to be able to list the exact statutory rules off the top of my head, but it's intended for, of course, agricultural land. It's got to be so many acres of a single parcel, and similar to benefit fee, if the property was ever platted and developed, that property would have to make catch-up payments and essentially pay its way. So two similar concepts, two different areas of the statutes.
One example would be the property we annexed to see, you know, when that benefit district was formed, that property wasn't developing, but now that's what they're doing, so they become subject to paying in.
Correct.
And at that point, they pay what would be the full amount of what they missed and.
Right.
On the special fee, were you done? I'm sorry.
Yes.
On the special fee, that would be the same, that if they tap in, they would be responsible for the full amount back into it. If there's a property owner that basically says, this is 20 years, I'll live on septic until the stupid fee's gone, at 21 years they decide to tap in, they're not required to pay any of the benefit district fee at that point. Would that be correct?
I think that's accurate. Yeah, there is some disincentive if you get towards the end of the assessment period, correct?
Okay.
Disincentive to develop, I'm sorry, during that little window, yeah.
And I was gonna say, I know a property that has seen that where there's 35 acres prime for development that the last 5 years of the benefit district have basically just sat there because nobody's gonna pay that amount for that time.
Yeah. There is some flexibility afforded to how and when those benefit fees get paid, but the statute does anticipate a lump sum of what you would have paid to date.
We probably have half a dozen, in this area that's all shaded, there's probably a half a dozen single-family homes, I'm thinking, what constitutes a development? If you know, a single connection versus, development, redevelopment of their 10 acres, if they divide their 10 acres into 30 lots, that's one form of a connection, but if their septic fails in this benefit time and they choose to connect, I guess it's as to how we create the assessment mechanism, it would all go, I mean, if it was a square foot basis, it would still go back to that square foot basis. And the whole 10 acres would have to pay, there's no, if you're I don't know if you're following me.
That's my.
There's an intensity of development, right, or an intensity of connection. Whether we're just connecting the one single-family house that the
Gotcha.
couple's living on as they're living out their years, and they have to connect at some point in the future, or they sell to a developer and redevelop, the 10 acres into an intense.
So like in this case, sewer flow of how much they're actually utilizing by sewer flow.
Yeah, I think I'm following Mayor. So if they would tap in and they're in the benefit fee area, I mean, I think there's a concept in the statutes that you sort of disregard the current use of the property. It's not whether the property is situated, in your example, one home on 10 acres is benefited. It's whether the property would be benefited for any use. So I do think, I think Patrick's right. It would be, per square foot as prescribed in the petition. I don't want to blame the massive case law, but a lot of the rulings are it's a fact intensive process on those to use some lawyer language at the end.
It does get tricky. We had an example with the stoplight within the district was the school district, and the school district, you know, were appalled that they had to pay the assessments, and because you disregard the current use of the property being school, you look at the, you know, best use of the property, they were legally obligated on the assessments. Now, the city turned out, we gave a grant to cover those, but yeah, it's pretty strict on.
So I guess in my example, I would deed a quick claim, a half an acre around my house to myself and connect that parcel. I don't, I'm lawyer in here, but I'm in trouble.
Yeah. Do your lot split and then never develop the other.
My concern is you know, there are some a few larger parcels that have long-term owners that I'm sure do not have any intention of, you know, immediately developing and connecting to the sewer.
I think there is some flexibility if, for example, you as a property owner dedicated an easement toward the project, that could be considered, you know,
Part of
giving value, but otherwise it's pretty tough to get around.
Yeah, and you kind of raised the concern I was alluding to by asking the question about the exemptions and so forth, is just, you know, looking at yes, a large part of the ownership is Sunflower redevelopment, but then, as the mayor stated, there are a handful of properties, long-term ownership, and not wanting to burden those property owners unduly if they're not looking to develop or to.
So question on this, to create the benefit district, or actually, let's say the application is here, so to deny the benefit district creation would require more than 50% of the ownership? Or what, I mean, what would be required
to protest it?
Yeah,
or-
to stop it from
Of
happening.
course, the council has no obligation to enact anything.
Yeah.
But
We cannot.
do nothing, right?
We can do nothing. Well, I mean, we can do nothing, but let's say we go forward, what would it take to stop the application, stop the city, stop the
Right.
council?
So Kevin, you can probably address that.
Is it more than 50% of the landowners? Is it less? Is it, what's the mechanism on the protest to actually stop it?
Right, so the threshold for a valid petition under the statutes, the majority or 51% of the property owners liable for assessment. And so just by crossing that threshold.
And is that land acreage, or is that number of property owners? Because
Right, yeah.
if you have, we have 21 people on the list here. So if 13 of them are small property owners, but you have a couple really big ones, is it the number of owners protesting, or is it the acreage?
Acreage, yeah. Who's going to bear the
You
cost?
just
Yeah.
look at the colored map, and,
Yeah.
I mean, it tells you that.
Well, and that's
Right.
kind of where I'm going, that
Yeah.
I'm,
Right, yeah. So by virtue of having a valid petition, the petition threshold is sort of the inverse, is in a world where the city would initiate the benefit district, a majority of protesting property owners could shut down, petition to stop you from proceeding. But as Mike said, if a petition does come before this governing body, you don't have an obligation to approve it.
yeah. So in this case, I mean, being that, looking at that map, just rough estimate, and even if it's wrong, all they have to do is increase the benefit district to include more of their land. SRL is gonna own more than 50% of the land in the benefit district. So really, anybody outside of SRL would, even if they protest, would potentially lose, other than it being us.
I
Yeah,
think
if you
they
just
have
take-
about
if you-
80%
Yeah, I
of the
was gonna say-
ground.
I was
Yeah, I
gonna
was gonna
say-
say, if you just take
Yeah.
the green area, that's about 400 acres out
Oh,
of
yeah.
2,800
Like I said,
acres.
it's there, and if it wasn't, all they had to do was add to it, and they have it. Mike, that comes back to you. Of this list of 21, has the city talked to or approached them, and how many were favorable, how many were disfavorable? I notice USD 232 is in there, which would be countryside, which they would happily unload. if they got the amount that they would desire or believe it's worth out of it.
Yeah. So, a good question. No, we haven't gone out and purposely approached any of the owners, any of the other owners in the district about this. Have had the discussion with the school district that this was a possibility. They didn't give any indication one way or another. But I know, Mayor, with your consent, the applicant is here this evening and asked for a couple minutes of your time. I know they've had some of those discussions, so I think maybe they could directly address that question.
Hearing from them.
Yeah, that's great.
Mayor, Council, Mike, Patrick, thank you for having me here tonight. Bob Johnson with the Polsinelli Law Firm. I represent Sunflower Redevelopment. Great to be back in front of you and in front of you for the first time. I can address some of these questions and also just want to give a bit more context about this project in specific. I think Kevin and Jeff did a really nice job of giving the 101, which was the task for tonight and very appropriately the first step here. I think that the context for this particular project might be helpful in addressing some of these questions and thinking forward on next steps. Really, where we're at today, as everybody is very much aware, is a bit behind the eight ball on public infrastructure for the development as it goes through this zone here on the north, which will ultimately kind of be that mixed-use development zone on into the Astra Enterprise Park. You know, none of that obviously being sewered. What's the mechanism? What is the most efficient and expeditious way to get that public infrastructure put in place, and a fair and reasonable way to go about it as well? I know we're kind of couching this in the vein of an incentive, as an incentive application, but really it's, we need public infrastructure, we need public sewers where there haven't been and aren't today. How do we get there? In a way that, again, development pays for development, as Mike likes to say, and I think that's fair and right. Meaning, as Jeff and Kevin pointed out, and some of your questions have addressed, if you don't want to connect to the sewer, you don't pay. If you do want to connect, you pay. SRL is 80% plus, roughly, of the district, and we're going to pay from day one. So those who don't want to pay, who's going to get the benefit of the sewer or have that sewer, that option there to connect in, it'll be there for them if they want it, both for their uses today or for a development use in the future. But if they don't want to connect in and don't want to pay and don't want to take advantage of that new infrastructure, they won't. SRL will pay. We will start paying on those bonds day one. This is necessary to do now, though. We know that, and some of you have sat in all the same meetings that SRL has sat in. Development is coming, and it's coming fast. And that's why I say we're a bit behind the eight ball on having the public infrastructure necessary out here. So one way or another, we need to get this here. We think that, again, this mechanism to pay for your public sewers, to get them out there, is an efficient tool to use to get there. Maybe much less of an incentive than it might be in some of those 100 rooftop scenarios where you're talking about a single development, single developer, you know, putting that in place, you know, before it gets broken up into lots. Again, this is really getting your public sewer system expanded into the new growth areas of your city. A couple of the questions that you were addressing before, you know, Mayor, I like kind of some of those mental gymnastics, but I think what it really breaks down to is the proportion of the district here with regard to some of those smaller lots, if they opt in, is going to be pretty minimal. Everybody has their own perception of what's minimal or not to their own particular circumstances. I understand that. And some people may choose not to opt in. I will put out there and kind of represent right now, without being at this stage in the game, that we have had many of those conversations with property owners, and I think we're going to have a very high percentage. I can't say 100%, but I do think that we're going to have a very high percentage here that will want to be in this sewer district. Again, you know, with the need for the sewer there, I think people understand that, and those who want to take advantage of it will be invested in that day one. Again, with the option that they, if they don't choose to be, they don't have to be, although they'll have that benefit there available to them. Next steps, that will be bringing that petition to you, and at that time, we'll know, not just through conversation, but through ink, who's going to sign on from day one. We very much look forward to rolling up our sleeves. We've had some good preliminary conversations with Mike, Jeff, Kevin, working towards what the structure could look like, but they're preliminary. We want that opportunity to continue to work with your staff, and then your financing committee, that deals with these types of applications, to really put that meat on the bone and come back to you with a very substantive plan, moving past this 101 stage to say, here's what this looks like in real numbers, in real impact. We can slice and dice by each particular property, and you can really see with a fine-tooth comb, here's how this really looks and impacts any perspective that you want to look at it from. So hopefully that gives a little bit more context to what we're looking at to capture the development opportunities that I think we all want out here. This is a crux. This is a key piece. Without sewers, nothing's coming. With sewers, I think the world is our oyster here in DeSoto. Certainly Sunflower is incredibly proud to partner with the city for what we've already accomplished, but not only that, what we're about to accomplish in the near term. And this is not, again, and some of those examples are real examples. 3 years later, oh, I forgot about this. That's not what this is going to be. If we move this forward quickly, we will be able to capture particular development opportunities. This sewer, we're looking at next year when this is going to be built. So this is not something that's going to sit and wait, and we're not sure how long this is going to take. This is an immediate project that we hope to partner with you on and bring to fruition. So I'm happy to answer any questions I can at this point.
Questions for Mr. Johns?
So one question. The area east of Astra Parkway there and south of 103rd/Lexington is the Panasonic Project Area 1 and 2.
Yes, sir.
And the bright green in the northwest corner would be Clearview City and the Asher property.
Sorry.
So Flint's just across there. With sewer at Flint and sewer at Panasonic, is there not sewer in that area already in the sense of connections and ability to connect?
There's not capacity in those. Yeah, Mike with Cobb Valley can give a little bit of information.
Engineering.
Step to the mic.
Yes, thank you. Actually, the eastern part of Flint currently cannot be sewered by the Flint sewer they've put in coming up Edgerton currently. Clearview City, again, can't be sewered other than
Eastern part of Edgerton? Or eastern?
eastern part of the Flint development, which isn't right on Edgerton, but is within the benefit district we've defined.
So the
which
Flint
is,
residential area?
yes, currently that cannot reach the sewer they put up Edgerton Road. If they do, it'd be a separate lift station and some other things of that nature. Clearview City, again, can't be sewered by anything at this point in time. All the properties on the south side of 95th Street have no sewer at this time. One thing I did want to point out, Mayor, you were discussing the smaller properties in what I would call the southwest corner of 95th Street and Lexington. That's where we have half a dozen or dozen smaller properties in there. That's actually an entirely separate leg of this sewer. So if, as a majority, they did not want to be part of the district as a whole, we can carve that out of the district. Currently, right now, we've included it because in our discussions with Michael, there are some needs in there that would probably be beneficial in the near term rather than far term, but we have a separate leg that goes under Lexington and into that portion of it. The bulk of the sewer runs off of Astra under 103rd, around the Clearview City property. There's a drainage ditch in there, comes in underneath what is the north or south of the lagoon, or north of the lagoons that make up Clearview City's lagoons right now. So that picks up the Sunflower property. It picks up a property called the Olms property, which we've spoken with those owners, and they definitely want to be part of it. The school district, of course, is on the south side of that. When we cross the street, get under the bridge there at Lexington, It's all sunflower land again in that regard. In fact, the easements through what will be land dedicated to the park have already been dedicated through the platting process. We then end up on the Terra Vista land. We've spoken with them in detail. His number one concern, and I think it's something we can work through, is about between what they took for his property and floodplain. He's interested in being a part of it too, so, sorry. That gets you kind of through the whole list of who's in and who's out, or who might want to be out, and almost everybody's interested in being in.
I think the key thing that Bob answered was that they understand that if we're unwilling participants, they don't anticipate them being forced in to make the district work, and I'm certainly not in favor of making everybody pay if they don't want to be part of it.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Mayor. And the distinction is that some properties may not sign the petition that may be in the district because they're benefited. Again, Kevin spoke to that. The statute requires benefited properties, but there's a distinction there between being benefited and being in the district and having that opportunity, and being forced to pay, if you will, without opting in.
Yeah, I'd want that clarified, because I think I heard from our representatives that you can't pick and choose who's considered benefited,
right.
Yeah.
But you can pick and choose I mean, just because they're benefited does not mean they have to
In the district.
participate
Yeah.
and pay, right?
They would just
They don't
have,
have to exercise their benefit.
they would have sort of a cloud on their title, knowing that, not a cloud, but anybody buying that property would see that it's in the benefit area. So if someone's looking for development, just like the property we annexed tonight, you'd know that, oh, that's in the benefit fee area. If I'm gonna do anything within the 20 years, then
then you're
I'll have
subject
to-
to that benefit fee.
Right.
So if the residences didn't want to, could they actually carve it out of the benefit district where they weren't in the benefit district?
Yeah, that's what they're saying, that they would run the sewer, so legally it would be deemed they're not benefited because the line doesn't go through their property. But yeah, if it goes through their property or close, they have to be considered benefited.
Certainly one of those details that we're happy to work through as to which properties should have the option, that we could take a whole leg off there, but then that gives, the downside being, in the future, that won't be there if people do want to connect in, but
And I mean, I
that's one of those
understand
details.
I
Yeah.
understand that sewer actually helps improve property costs. I know we've got a neighborhood over by me in between Corliss and Waverly that if sewer was available, they would happily have the entire neighborhood sign on to the benefit district to have it, so. Because they understand the value of having that infrastructure. And they've been asking me that for 6 years.
And just to clarify, if a property in the benefit district, but they choose not to hook up to that sewer, they're not paying for that benefit until at a later point if they were either to tap in or sell that property to someone who would develop and do so.
That's how we're anticipating approaching it.
Or if they
Yes.
ride out the 20 years, then they would just have a connection fee and not have to pay the benefit districts if they just rode it out.
Right.
So, there are a number of here school district, and maybe they're in and out. Board of Regents, I assume that's the KU land. I'm not sure how much of the KU land is considered in the benefit district, but I think that's a prime example of one that they're not gonna have any intention of developing that. And may never, I mean, they may just sell it, but would they automatically, because of the collection area that you're designing, then be incurring the cost of the benefit district? Or is Sunflower Redevelopment saying you are gonna 100% carry the cost of anybody who would be impacted so that nobody else will pay?
I think that's one of those details we need to have an opportunity to work through. I think it's a bit
So you will
preliminary.
cover anybody else's costs who may be benefited technically.
Yeah.
But not wanna be in.
I think we will be until such time as people want to connect and then they defray those costs. So yes, SRL will carry the bulk of costs. If some people never opt in, then we'll carry those costs for the 20 years, if that makes sense. But I think, again, I want to be crystal clear on my answers for you and give you the absolute most technical answer I can. and give us the benefit to work with your staff and your financing committee to come to you and show you exactly how that'll work all together in one package. I think I understand your question, and I think the answer is SRL will carry the bulk of costs that others might receive as benefited until such time as they opt in, if that's what you're asking. But
Not bulk of, I'm saying all. But when they opt in,
Yeah.
they would be responsible for the 20-year
Right.
worth of payment.
Yes.
Not just, so if they opt in at 10 years, they have the 20 years of payments to
Right,
do.
to make up.
That's more statutory than, okay.
And so, can I ask kind of some questions as to the merits of doing it, Mayor? Not just the mechanics of it, but.
The merits of extending, building a sewer to Astra. Sure.
Because, you know, I get it, and, you know, if you got sewers out there, it makes it more developable. But I question, one, it hasn't been the need so far. Flint, who's kind of first out there, they did it, and they bared the cost of it, and it was successful. And Panasonic the same way, and that's where development is paying for itself, and that it is figured into the cost of the project and therefore the incentives of that project. I'm wondering why such a large district, was it 2,800 acres, or 2,800 acres, or 2,400 maybe, 2,200 that would be Sunflower, would need to be activated at this point, as opposed to, say, taking it as the developments come along and looking at the costs that are associated with that, and then applying the incentive to create the opportunity to activate that project or that piece of property. And with that, and then let me add on one more thing to that. And then with that, then how much of that land that's in that area that's blue, that's Sunflower, is cleaned and cleared for potential development to begin with?
Yeah, no, appreciate the questions. So I would say, first of all, with regard to Panasonic, I think we all recognize that that is singular in the history of the state, and by virtue of that, the community. I mean that in many ways, but I also specifically in this instance mean that the cash outlay from Panasonic is such a rarity. I don't think it's of the likes that we'll see again from any tenant or land buyer that we might have at Astra. I think it's such a unique project that to expect that level of cash commitment for infrastructure is unlikely and just unprecedented and a rarity that we see in development. So I think that's something that we couldn't plan on, I guess is what I'd say about other development at Astra. I can't specifically speak to the Flint deal. It had some uniqueness to it. The base grant was able to take a large chunk of their public infrastructure costs off the table. That's not something we have at play here. And so other than that, I don't want to represent what their structure is like vis-a-vis this structure. I can say in this case, and maybe this also kind of answers your second question about how much land is available for development. That is as you probably know, Astra is like Swiss cheese, right? I think people tend to think, oh, wow, Astra, the Sunflower redevelopment plant or ammunition plant, the whole thing's dirty. It's all covered in contaminants. That's not the case. It's pockets. And so what that translates to as far as developable land, when you have a particular party interested in a site, the Army and SRL have some flexibility to focus their intention on particular sites and get those ready for development, clean up particular pockets that might remain contaminated in a more accelerated fashion, or move a particular area to a higher priority. And so there is, I don't know, Mike, total acreage that is available out there right now that is totally clean. Certainly over 1,000 acres.
Well, there was 1,300 in the northeast quadrant, and when we look at the land, which includes the blue area, kind of on the northeast side of Lexington there.
Yeah.
That's completely clean.
Right.
Ready for somebody to come in and put in. We just don't have sewers there right now. And you can't get to the Panasonic sewer from that piece of ground.
Yep.
When you come to everything south of 103rd and west of Astor Parkway, that's in the realm of almost 1,800 acres, if I'm not mistaken, in that regard,
Right.
1,500.
Yep.
Large portions of that, not all of it, are ready for development. They're clean. And so, as Bob's pointing out, if someone wants 200 acres, there may be 200 acres clean there we can put them on, but we again have no sewer there. And it's not just one moving target. It's a piece here and a piece here and a piece there type thing. So to fill those in can be done fairly expeditiously if and when. The total plan for everything you see in blue is the end of 2026 right now. So getting the sewer started for the end of 2026 is somewhat critical.
So that's, yeah, to put that into context for real life scenarios right now. So as Mike said, acres where you don't really need to do anything at all, 1,000 to 2,000 acres, a lot of land. There are particular sites that are expeditiously moving forward as development opportunities right now that have some schmooze and AOCs that need to be addressed. Those are technical terminology, I'm sure you know better than I, that need to be cleaned up. Those sites aren't slowing down for that reason because, again, attention can be shifted to particular areas to address the remediation in those areas that needs to occur. It's not a hindrance. What would be a hindrance, as Mike was just saying, is not having sewer there ready to go when those properties want to close and start development. So that gets to why this vehicle makes sense, why we don't think it makes sense to piecemeal it over time, to do it in smaller chunks, to do it in a way where there's a patchwork solution. First of all, there's a lot of inefficiency there, I think, if you put together a patchwork solution, which means cost for all parties involved. Secondly, it's just missing opportunities. If we don't put this sewer in, if we don't move forward and do it very quickly, again, we're already behind the 8 ball now, not having that sewer out there. It's a hindrance to attacking some of these opportunities that that we're all, are aware of in this room. Not that we can speak to them publicly, but that are looking very closely at this site. We're getting not only private interest from those parties themselves, state is bringing us a lot of opportunities. We won't be able to execute on those opportunities unless we have this sewer there. And so it's not the cleanup that's the hindrance. Again, it's the sewer and not having that in place. And if we don't put more than just one particular site or 2 or 3 sites in play, or just the clean land, we're gonna get way behind the 8 ball and miss a lot of opportunity.
And one thing I'm gonna add, when you think of the length of sewer that goes in, most of it's north of 103rd. And we have to make that connection to the lift station to be able to serve things south of 103rd. There's no way to get any service south of 103rd without connecting through everything north of 103rd over to the lift station. And that makes up over 50% of the actual sewer construction activities to even get service to the very first southern lot south of 103rd.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, you can make the same statement about what happened with Panasonic, regardless of how monumental that was. There is ridiculous amounts of off-site improvements in terms of thoroughfare construction on 103rd and Lexington, sewer extension all the way to the treatment plant that had to occur to benefit that little piece. So I don't buy into the argument that, well, a lot of that cost is off-site and so it should be spread to them. I personally think it would be a really, really bad situation for those property owners to say, we're going to have costs levied on your property and your property taxes to the benefit of Sunflower redevelopment. So I think unless you can get to a situation where anybody and everybody isn't interested in paying that is out and that Sunflower redevelopment will be bearing the full cost, then I think that'd be a horrible move.
Yeah, again, those properties will have the benefit of having a sewer they could connect to there. They don't have to pay if they don't want to. And so theoretically, Sunflower redevelopment could pay for the next 20 years. I don't think that's what's going to happen because people will want to be connected to the sewer that'll go through their land that they don't have right now. But theoretically, that's what could occur. If it's only sunflower redevelopment that is benefited, meaning only properties on sunflower redevelopment are developed and want to have access to sewer, it'll be just sunflower redevelopment that'll pay for that.
Okay. Question for you, Mike. How much of the TIF associated with the Panasonic project can be used off within Sunflower, but off of the Panasonic property?
Well, so the way the TIF is set up is that any TIF revenues generated can be used anywhere on Astra. They can also be used off-site for certain public improvements, including a sewer
Including
extension.
sewer. So the TIF mechanism that's already in place could be drawn upon to build this sewer.
Could be, yes.
That was my second
No,
question.
yeah, no, the problem with that is, the TIF is in place, but the TIF it lags development, right?
Yeah, obviously, there'd have to be TIF revenues.
Well,
Yeah.
understood,
So
but
you-
there's also could be financing that could, this is the financing tool that is covering that gap, and it's routing it through the city. And so consequently, I would assume there would be a significantly less, or if any, request for additional incentives on a particular project that would come forward that would be within this benefit district.
I think that TIF revenues can go back to pay special assessments, so that may be the way that they're applied in the future. So I think it might be a pro rata exchange.
But if another project were to come forward that is dependent upon that sewer, then Sunflower Redevelopment would not be coming in with a request for additional incentives for that project.
I don't think I could make that representation. I think you're going to see many different projects coming in there with various capital stacks that, in their own requests. And I think what I was saying, and I might not have said it very artfully, is property may come in and say, I have special assessments on my land for the sewer, and I'm paying those over the next so many years. The TIF that's created by my project can go back to pay for those special assessments, essentially paying for my portion of the sewer as an eligible
I guess that's what I'm
cost.
saying. I would question that we would want to consider another incentive on top of that, in which case the TIF is already being used to pay for the costs that are associated with this.
Yeah, I think that those will be decisions to make at the time with each particular project. None of us can anticipate what any particular project out there will ask for, but obviously you'll have the discretion at that time to consider those applications, if any.
So clarification, with the benefit district overlapping the TIF couldn't pay for the sewer, it could only pay for the assessment fees from the benefit district because they were horizontal, but couldn't actually pay for the whole sewer and then the assessment fees.
It legally can pay for sewer costs, but there aren't any TIF revenues there today
But it would
because.
be the assessment fees that would be paying, not the actual sewer at that point, because it's reimbursing for,
It's a timing issue.
Timing issue.
so it's not like you'd be paying the sewer out of the TIF and then the assessment fees, it'd be reimbursing the assessment fees because that's the actual
That's
cost
the
of
sewer. The underlying improvement is
Or
the
your
sewer.
portion of the benefit district.
Right.
So I guess the policy questions, we fully answered, I guess the first one, is just the appetite to create a benefit district for sewers, to create sewer service at Astra.
Let me go back and ask a clarification here. And this is the process type of question. The next step would be them bringing the petition forward?
Yeah, that would be the next.
Okay,
yeah.
and at that point, with the petition coming to us, we would know of those 21 property owners who signed off and said, I want to, and we would know at that point who was saying they didn't. So the next step in the process would be on them to bring the petition to us.
Yes.
That clarifies who signs off and who doesn't.
That would be the next legal proceeding, yeah, that the full council would see. But with our economic incentives policy, this, the next thing practically for us would be to get the finance committee together, staff to work on all of these questions that we've had before, get clarity on all of that.
Another clarifying question. I mean, it sounds like this is likely not the case from what we're hearing, but if at that time we see a significant number of the property owners not wanting to be part of the benefit district, even though there's no way they can come over the 50% land mass, could the council choose to reconsider at that point? Or once we start down this road, like,
Well,
we're in.
I would venture we can change our mind anytime we want. We're the council. We can do whatever we want.
You would have to pass a resolution essentially saying you are moving forward with the benefit district. So if you don't pass that resolution, then this thing stops
So they
dead
bring,
in its
so
tracks.
they bring the petition, and then at that point, we would pass a resolution upholding the petition and approving it or denying it? Or would they bring the petition, we'd say yes, then there's a protest period, and then when would the resolution come in that process?
So there's not a protest, it's not. I mean, they're gonna have a valid petition, but before the benefit district can move forward, the city council has to pass a resolution forming the district. And if you don't do that, then they're never gonna
And
get.
that's our approval of the petition at that point.
Right, and
Passing
forming
it.
it.
But
Yeah.
they bring the petition, and we don't have to take the next step then.
Correct.
Even if there's more than 50% saying yes in that petition, and we've said.
It's our decision
It's
whether
our
or not the
decision.
district is created.
Got it.
The point I'd like to make is that this mechanism that's being described tonight has been used, still used in Johnson County to drive development that's made this county the economic engine that it is. It's happened since one of the first projects I worked on when I got out of college was calculating assessments on a jillion lots in 20 subdivisions in southern Overland Park. So this is if we want to grow, if we believe that growth and development at Astra is the right thing for the city, in my opinion, this is the only mechanism, the best mechanism that we can use to advance the project. I don't see another, there's a ton of expense off-site to get the sewer to the site. And I don't have, in my experience, the city doesn't have in its budget or capacity the $15 million or the $10 million to bring a 3-mile sewer to that site. What I hear from the developer is that they're willing to pay that, but they don't have that cash in their pocket right now either. And unless we get another Panasonic, I don't think we're going. I would tend to agree with Bob that that's a very unique set of conditions that we were able to negotiate a deal like that. So if we think that development is the right thing to happen at Astra to bring that land back to productive use and into our city, I see this as the next logical step for that to happen.
I was gonna say, I agree in a lot of circumstances. The Panasonic is extremely unique. Kevin, you mentioned 103rd, but 103rd is extremely unique. That's paying for so much of it. It's not Panasonic, it's not Flint, it's the state coming in and providing a tremendous amount. And I mean, I would be curious because obviously this is the direction that you believe needs to go. So my guess is you're planning on bringing a petition.
Yes, sir.
When that petition comes, we will know, probably should know very clearly of those 21 landowners who signed on. Obviously, if there's 100% sign-on, then, I mean, you just shrugged, going, okay, if they're all in agreement, then why would we say no when everybody's agreeing? If it's all but maybe one or two, then like you said, they've got the option to just wait out the 20 years and stay on the septic or stay on what they've got. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I agree with the mayor on the fact that we talked long and hard for years about getting sewer out there, how much it was going to cost. And there's still large sections that aren't served by the Panasonic, that aren't served by the plant, to where my position would be, okay, bring the petition, let us see what the statistics are as far as the 21 landowners, how many have said yes? Because like I mentioned, I've got a neighborhood over by me that has begged for a benefit district to get sewer to their properties, just it's not physically capable of happening yet. But as soon as enough sewer extensions get to that point where they could, they'd be asking for it. So it's one of those ones that I kind of agree with Mayor and say, okay, bring the petition and let's see what that means.
Yeah, and I too want to enable the development and growth to happen there. I think, you know, a lot of the questions, and the reason I'm asking the questions tonight is I don't want to, you know, overly burden a property owner that happens to fall in there who, you know, sees this as, you know, as a burden and not as a benefit, and something that they're being, you know, that they feel forced into, even if there isn't any forcing into. So, you know, I just want to, I think, you know, of course, as Rob said, if we see all 21 are signed on, our job becomes extraordinarily easy, in my opinion. And then at that point that we are able to see that petition, I think it'll become more clear if we do have some, you know, owners that are concerned, or as you mentioned, that one leg of the sewer needs to be reconsidered. I think that's going to provide a lot more clarity. Until then, we're just a little bit guessing how people may or may not feel. But just wanting to make sure we're, you know, protecting those individuals who don't feel that, you know, development is burdening them, while still enabling the city to have this, you know, development opportunity that I think ultimately is a good opportunity for our city and our community.
One, Patrick, did you say there was a mechanism that if they deed right, for example, a property owner that may not want to be in the benefit district is forced into it, the main is now going through their property and it gets in through the right of way, that deeding or giving
That's
the right
just-
of way is a potential offset of the.
That's one mechanism. Of course, if the easement was worth, you know,
Yeah.
$2,000 and
Versus 10,000 for their
yeah,
assessment or
so it would
whatever.
have to have some reason to it.
Okay.
But yeah, that is one way to
So
to establish that that property, you know, paid its share by giving up the easements.
Anything over here?
They basically said everything I would think, so I'm not gonna keep repeating it.
Thank you. What do you need? Do you need more from us?
You know, as we discussed, this is the first introduction of an economic incentive. So,
Oh, yeah, but it's more than that. It's whether or not
well, we know. Yeah, that's right.
That's really the question.
It is.
A
It
good
is.
discussion.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, we're not expecting any, you know, any definitive policy direction tonight. I think we got plenty of good feedback, good information from the applicant, from our consultants. Jeff and Kevin, appreciate you being here tonight and giving us this, this update. I do know that we may be seeing another one of these, not to this scale, but another one. So very good groundwork laid here this evening. I think it's plenty for the Finance Committee on the, in accordance with the policy to move forward in further negotiations, refining the petition, the particulars of everything we've discussed tonight. So I think, yeah, Mayor, I think that's plenty for us.
Thank you all.
Mayor, 2 hours and 15 minutes in, can we request a bathroom break?
We're down to the last three items, but yes. 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Thank you.
Man, my Google Chrome crashed.
Yes, sir.
Has never done that before.
You can't shift or you shift out of the camera, so like. I gotta go get my laptop. Sit right here.
Yeah. It's not happened before.
You need to rattle off those last 3 items for everybody?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's close. Oh, good. Yeah, thanks, guys. Good job. Oh, really? Oh. Oh, really? So it's mass oversimplification to say, yeah, if you don't want it. Yeah. Yeah, okay, okay, yeah. But then, you know, I think we haven't really yet. So as we suspected, that'll be the grind for the next couple weeks.
We did do something in that one of the plans that would have allowed an
Yeah.
exception.
Well, but hold on, it was the TIF. It was the TIF, they're getting tiffed, but yeah. Same deal, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Remember that.